The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 269. Second Coming of Heavenly Demon. Part 1. Immediately after the capture of Rascal, contrary to the thoughts of the Kronos Empire, Roman Dmitri didn't return to the Western Front. He headed towards Kordas instead, which was a crucial strategic location in the eastern part of Kronos. Kordas served a similar purpose as the rear position of the southern front of the Cairo kingdom. All goods and manpower traveling from the Kronos Empire to the east relied on Kordas's warp gate. On days when the warp gate was out of order, the only alternative was located hundreds of kilometers away. And when Kronos intensified their chase, Roman Dmitri entered Kordas with a companion. Are the boundaries strict? It was a man in his mid-30s who seemed to be anxious. His name was Nelson, and he didn't belong to Dmitri, nor was he a specialized combat resource. However, he chose to accompany Roman Dmitri. While all other troops retreated to the Western Front, Nelson, who had been hiding nearby, made his way to Kordas, abandoning the blazing Rascal. And at present, he had a destination ahead of him. With a loud voice, Roman Dmitri declared, "I will secure the path from here on." Enveloped in darkness, Roman Dmitri moved towards the rampart and swiftly scaled it with astounding agility. Not a single sound could be heard from above. The soldiers stationed in all directions on the wall maintained their positions, but amidst the stifling tension, a rope descended. Drop. He recognized it as a signal to use the rope. Nelson gripped the rope and heaved himself upward, finally getting a view of what had occurred on the wall. Kronos' soldiers died standing, he muttered under his breath. His heart sank at that realization. The guards who had been on duty had been caught off guard, as if Roman Dmitri had intentionally orchestrated their distraction. There was certainly a good reason why people spoke highly of him. If it hadn't been for Roman Dmitri, the one who had hired him for this perilous mission, Nelson wouldn't have taken part in this dangerous scheme. Moving forward, he knew things would only grow more treacherous. There were a series of assassinations. Roman Dmitri acted first to handle the guards, allowing Nelson to enter amidst enemy lines with minimal risk. This plan had to be executed covertly. Therefore, Roman Dmitri refrained from bringing soldiers and sent Chris and the others to the Western Front instead, as he feared a power vacuum during his journey to Kordas. At least 3 days were required. It was a time-consuming process. If the forces of the Kingdom Alliance were destroyed before then, they had no choice but to continue a difficult fight from then on. That is it. Nelson's eyes sparkled. Finally, the destination was reached. Since it was the most important place in Kordas, the security system was so tight that only a dozen or so soldiers could be seen at a glance. But he wasn't worried. The imposing presence of Roman Dmitri, who had lurked in the shadows, remained undetectable to the soldiers' keen senses. And when he finally exposed himself, he swiftly eliminated dozens of individuals. There wasn't even a single opportunity for them to let out a scream or raise a signal. By the time he noticed the person beside him had collapsed, their necks had twisted the other way. The stage was set. Looking at Nelson, Roman Dmitri spoke. "Now it's your turn." "I understand." There was the colossal edifice. At the sight of the impressive warp gate, Nelson swallowed hard and continued onward. Nelson's role was that of a warp gate technician. Cairo and Dmitri regarded him as the best technician, and he had been chosen for this mission at Roman Dmitri's request. It wasn't obligatory. The reward that Roman Dmitri had offered for the mission's success was undeniably immense, and Nelson concluded that it was worth risking his life for. The issue, however, was "Wing." The piercing sound of the emergency bell resounded. The fact that someone had touched the warp gate alerted the security inside. Bright lights emerged from all directions. The sound of a group of people rushing echoed loudly, accompanied by a clanking sound. And Nelson found it challenging to focus on his work, his heart pounding. His hands trembled. There was only one person who could keep him safe, Roman Dmitri. If the intruder managed to break through, Nelson would be unlikely to survive. And then it happened. Concentrate on the task. I will deal with the adversaries. Hearing Roman Dimitri's voice, he exhaled. With this strategy, only Roman Dimitri stood out. He was known for always leading in seemingly unwinnable situations and taking responsibility, even if there were casualties along the way. That's why his hand steadied upon hearing Roman Dimitri's words. Considering the appealing offer, others had faith that they could depend on Roman Dimitri. They continued with their work. They planned to take control of the warp gate from this point forward. They had to disconnect the coordinates connected to the Kronos Empire and establish new ones. Starting now, Cortez's warp gate can no longer be considered a part of the Kronos Empire. Just like Edwin Hector, who positioned himself at the rear to take the southern front, Roman Dimitri did the same. However, the pace was swift. As they manipulated the warp gate with speed, they heard a sound from behind and turned around. Grrrng. Rumbly. It's Roman Dimitri. Charge. The enemies had emerged. The clash of weapons and the screams of people were audible, but Nelson didn't bother to turn around. He knew that if he did, he would witness a horrifying scene. It seemed that he couldn't complete the task correctly while working in such conditions, with the screams continuing. As the explosion happened, a blast of heat and wind swept over, yet Roman Dimitri blindly trusted that he wasn't the target of the direct attack. Gasping for air and with a red face, Nelson focused on the task and finally had a hopeful expression. It is done. At that moment, Nelson looked surprised. Over Roman Dimitri's reliable back, an uncountable number of troops were terrifyingly strewn across the ground. Only then did he realize that a one-sided massacre had taken place while he was working. When the plan was first mentioned in Cairo, the leaders of the Dimitri alliance were shocked. Do you really intend to rob the warp gate of Cortez and destroy Rascal as a distraction? It's an incredibly dangerous mission. Even if we manage to pull it off and secure the warp gate, the power difference is so vast that we would be at a serious disadvantage outside the castle walls. Kronos mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops. They had faith in Roman Dimitri, but launching an offensive first would be tantamount to suicide, and their best bet was to focus on defense. Roman Dimitri said, I understand your concerns. Kronos definitely has the upper hand in terms of power, and most people believe that Dimitri's victory is about safeguarding the Western Front against Kronos's attack. However, Dimitri sees the victory differently. Instead of bragging about driving the enemy away, he wishes for the Kronos Empire to acknowledge their defeat openly. We can't simply rely on defensive measures for a victory like that. In the end, we must be willing to shed blood and sink our teeth into Kronos's flesh to achieve a decisive and terrifying outcome. They didn't appreciate Kronos's attitude or the sight of them pretending to be innocent and approaching Roman Dimitri. But, in a typically unacceptable situation, a high-ranking noble in Cairo inquired. It's not that we don't trust Roman Dimitri. The issue is that the war involving Dimitri revealed that the Kronos Empire can attempt to warp without utilizing the gate. If they opt to warp directly and launch an attack on Cairo or other locations, there is no other alternative but to experience utter chaos. Right, as I just said, the Kronos Empire utilized these unknown skills that the world isn't aware of. However, this ability isn't absolute. There are clearly limits on the number of people or the time allowed. There are obviously conditions for warps that don't involve warp gates. If there were no restrictions on their capabilities, it would be more advantageous for them to directly attack the home base without going through the Western Front. And yet, choosing to go to war on the Western Front is a way to demonstrate one's limitations. Perhaps the Kronos Empire intentionally refrained from using the warp to demonstrate their strength. But whatever the reason, Roman Dimitri had no intention of standing idly by, fearing unknown forces. This war is a matter of life and death for both nations. If there is any possibility of utilizing the warp, we need to confirm its existence before we proceed. We are not fighting this war just to survive against the Kronos Empire. We fight as equals, not as weaklings. To those who consider themselves to be the rulers of this continent, we will prove that we are not their pawns. It was brutal. Roman Dimitri's sharp force made people gulp. He was always capable of changing an impossible situation. Since he was not one to fabricate falsehoods, they were amazed when he spoke of an all-out war with Kronos. The moment we capture Cortes, even the Kronos Empire will have no choice but to create a blank. Our goal is to isolate the Kronos Empire in the east and obliterate it in an all-out war. We only need one victory. If Cairo and Dimitri's forces are triumphant in a battle where armies clash, the flames of counterattacks will ignite across the continent. It's always the same. A life of no retreat. That was how Roman Dimitri, a mere baron, rose to such a position. Across the room, a man with an intrigued expression listened to the conversation and asked earnestly, "May I ask something?" "Go ahead." The man's name was Marquis Valentino. As a prominent member of the centrist faction, he had become a leader among the nobles supporting Dimitri in the Cairo kingdom. And he spoke. "I will always support Roman Dimitri. But there's one thing. Promise me you'll forge a new sword after this war. It's not too much to ask, right? I've been eagerly waiting for Roman Dimitri's collection. Even if I don't get it, I'll put it up for auction. Just create a new sword, and I'll fully support Roman Dimitri's plan, even if it means sacrificing the hidden power of the Valentino family." He was simply unique. It was Marquis Valentino who expressed his desire to gather more than just the survival of the nation in this situation. Weak. A brilliant light shone. Then a group of troops appeared through the warp gate. Chuck. The soldiers marched in perfect order. The beginning was Marquis Valentino. He brought all of his enlisted men, followed by soldiers belonging to Cairo. In the meantime, Marquis Valentino wore Blaze on his waist, the one that he purchased from Roman. Just by looking at the shining sheath, one could tell how much he valued Blaze. And there were the soldiers of the Dimitri Duchy. Viscount Lawrence and Viscount Conrad accompanied the soldiers, and in an instant, a large number of troops filled the area around the warp gate. It might be a humble amount compared to the countless Kronos soldiers, but with their unwavering determination for war, they underwent rigorous training under Roman's guidance. However, an unexpected individual emerged. It was Kevin. "I offer my respects, my lord. You have conquered the demon within you. All gratitude goes to the Lord for taking care of me." Leaving Dimitri behind, he immediately headed for Adelian. On his way, he gained newfound knowledge instead of relying on the warp gate. And the soldiers of the duchy stood ready under Roman's command. When they heard that the Cortes gate had been taken, Kevin joined them. The reunion was short, and they were safe. Roman surveyed the troops and spoke loudly to those awaiting his orders. "From this moment on, we shall devastate the eastern region of Kronos, beginning with Cortes. Let the Kronos Empire be enraged by our actions. To begin, search Cortes immediately and eliminate any enemies you encounter." The order fell. The soldiers swiftly dispersed, their power palpable. In eastern Kronos, Cortes was a strategically important location. The place was captured in a mere day. And the following day, the Duke of Bamford received news. Chapter 270. Second Coming of Heavenly Demon. Part 2. At the fall of Cortes, the soldiers' report stirred a mix of emotions in Duke Bamford. Dimitri. So this was the place. He was impressed. It would have been expected for Rascal to be captured and for them to flee to the Western Front, but Roman Dimitri did more and captured Cortes. It was only then that he realized why Cairo was chosen and understood Dimitri's alliance. Their plan to abandon the Western Front and secure time was based on their strong belief that Roman Dimitri would secure Cortes's warp gate. At that very moment, rage erupted. Dimitri's plan revealed his true motives. The absence of a warp gate means we are isolated. From now on, reinforcements will have no choice but to use the other warp gate, which is located hundreds of kilometers from Cortes. However, despite knowing the importance of the warp gate, we neglected to strengthen the defense of Cortes. It wasn't that we overlooked its significance, but rather, the plan seemed too ridiculous to attempt. His anger radiated. Duke Bamford led a staggering 300,000 troops, and they stormed to the west. Even though they were isolated, handling such a massive army seemed impossible. Cairo and Dimitri's alliance deliberately abandoned the Western Front, but it is accurate to say that the overwhelming strategic advantage forced their hand. Isolation meant nothing. They could easily annihilate Dimitri and Cairo at present. However, he felt wary. He was bold when making a decision, but he unexpectedly remembered a variable in Flora Lawrence's plan. Now the enemy only has one choice: avoid an all-out war at all costs and prevent us from getting supplies. Without a warp gate, our supply routes are cut off. Once all the food is consumed, there is no way we can handle the enormous amount of food needed for the 300,000 troops. With clear night tactics, it was evident that the enemy would retreat, annihilating all the provisions, which were the sole means to sustain this war's unpredictability. Duke Bamford promptly called for the commanders. He laid the map of the Western Front on the table in the barracks and examined a suitable location. Flip. From now on, we must prepare for a protracted battle. If we advance towards the capital of Cairo, they'll be forced to exhaust their food supplies beforehand. Assuming Kronos' supply corps arrives in the west within a month at the latest, we can foil the enemy's plans, even if we have enough provisions to sustain us until then. Then what about this location? One of the leaders gestured towards an unnamed spot on the map. It was an old castle where no one lived, but according to the Kronos Intelligence Department, this was a place where the Cairo kingdom hid food in preparation for an unexpected situation. Fortunately, it wasn't from the current location of the Kronos Empire. Cairo and Dimitri's alliance wouldn't think that Kronos knew about their secret castle, so if they captured the castle, they would be able to secure enough food to feed the entire army. There were two ways. They either had to rush in fast enough that they couldn't even attempt to use any assassination skills at night. Typically, they would have chosen the former. But they concluded that if they got caught up in Dimitri's plan and his unpredictable movements to take down Rascal and Cortez, they couldn't guarantee their own survival. If they could keep the troops stable, the chances of unexpected events occurring were non-existent, and the day would surely come when he would bring Roman Dimitri to his knees. Duke Bamford announced, "We are now heading towards the castle." The battlefield had transformed. Similar to Rascal, a cluster of soldiers could be observed moving away, stationed in the eastern part of Kronos. Hovering over the castle walls, Baron Zekman, Teslo's commander, wore a puzzled expression and said, "To consider utilizing the warp gate to assault the rear. Roman Dimitri is truly indulging in a futile fantasy of defeating Kronos." It was truly astonishing. Around 30,000 individuals crossed through the warp. Far from obliterating the main force, it was astonishing how Tesla was captured quickly. He was unable to comprehend Roman Dimitri's thoughts. In his heart, he longed to open the castle gates and decapitate Roman Dimitri immediately, but Duke Bamford issued an order that couldn't be avoided. Should Dimitri's troops arrive, delay them. We need time. To secure a certain victory, we need not heed the enemy's intentions. The Master of Battle's orders were absolute. No matter how overwhelming the Kronos Empire was, the battlefield where Duke Bamford appeared always achieved maximum results with less damage. That was why he was revered as a symbol of military prowess. For people like Baron Zekman, the option of disobeying the orders, enticed by the allure of fame, didn't exist. And it was at that moment that a man walked by from a distance. However, as soon as he confirmed that the white flag, which symbolized a discussion, wasn't present and that it was Roman Dimitri, Baron Zekman hurriedly spoke. "Attack them. Prevent Roman Dimitri from accessing the castle." Pop-a-pat. Arrows were swiftly shot. Darkness filled the sky, falling heavily as if it aimed to transform Roman Dimitri into a hedgehog. For ordinary soldiers, it was a frightening spectacle. Even if they raised their shields to block them, there was not enough room for humans to escape without being hit. But whack! Roman Dimitri was no longer present where the arrow had landed. He had completely disappeared. The moment he kicked the ground, he rushed so fast that even the arrows couldn't catch up. "Stop!" Stop it now. From above, arrows and magic descended. They made their utmost effort to obstruct Roman Dimitri's advance, but even if they managed to land a few blows, the strong barrier rendered it all pointless. In his capacity as Baron Zekman, he was at a loss as to what to do. Tesla's castle gates were safeguarded by a magical defense, so what could this human possibly be thinking, arriving here on his own? And then it happened. Rumble. Rumblee. It came crashing down. The aura emanated from Roman's sword, and without hesitation, he swung it towards the castle gate. And crack. People witnessed it with their own eyes. The steel gate appeared to be cleanly cut down, and the once shining magic defense was also destroyed. Quang! Quang! The gaps in the defense opened up. Simultaneously, the soldiers of the Kingdom Alliance, who had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment, cried out. Attack! Follow Roman Dimitri and wipe out those wretched creatures. Their target was Tesla, whose plan for endurance had ultimately failed. As soon as the gates swung open, it was only a matter of time before they seized control of the area. Against the advancing troops led by Roman Dimitri, Baron Zekman offered little resistance and promptly chose to surrender. I surrender. They knelt before them. They raised their white flag. The Kronos Empire's pride forbade surrender, but Duke Bamford had carefully prepared for this situation when Tesla fell. If you can't hold on for a while and give up, choose to surrender after resisting a little. It takes twice as many troops to keep an eye on one prisoner, so your existence is bound to be a burden to them. They won't kill you. Since the prisoners can be traded, there is a chance of us striking back, so be prepared for any unexpected situation. The people of Dimitri were outcasts. Time was not on their side, and victory in an all-out war seemed impossible. Frankly, they were shocked when the gate was breached, but Baron Zekman appeared unfazed by this development. The words he spoke were of surrender, but those standing behind him showed no signs of defeat. They held firm in their belief in Bamford's commands. And thus, the captured troops were gathered together. However, an eerie atmosphere hung in the air. The onlookers in the distance seemed disinterested in the fate of the captives. It was strange. Normally, it's a one-sided exchange when offering reconciliation for information, but what in the world are they thinking? Do they intend to slaughter us all? It doesn't make sense. I would never make such a decision, even with the prisoners taken from the crumbling Western Front. The soldiers cleared a path, and there stood Roman Dimitri. Without hesitation, Roman Dimitri stepped forward, seizing Baron Zekman by the hair. Thud. Ouch. What is happening? Are you the commander here, Baron Zekman? Why yes. No, that's right. But why are you doing this? If you want information or if you want to ask me something else, please be kind. This kind of treatment would not benefit you. He shouted. And Roman Dimitri glared down at him with a chilly expression upon hearing the request for fair treatment. I don't have any requests from you. What? He learned that Count Nicholas died in the battle on the Western Front. And many of the soldiers who failed to escape were most likely captured. Then, what was the role of the commander here? Would it be right to show proper mercy to the Kronos prisoners and guarantee their lives in exchange for his own men? That was the ideal figure for those who were captured. However, the role of the commander was a little different in Roman Dimitri's way. No, Baek Jung-hyuk. So that the lives of those who sacrificed themselves wouldn't be in vain. To achieve a clear victory, he had no intention of forcing the other soldiers to die in order to save the lives of those who fell into the hands of the enemy. Chuck. He placed the sword against his neck. Baron Zekman was desperate. He truly didn't expect Roman to make the decision to kill someone so swiftly. Just spare me this once. If you spare me, I'll provide valuable information to Dimitri. And you must spare me. Don't you want Dimitri's captives to survive? He refused to accept the reality. Roman Dimitri, the infamous figure that the world was abuzz with. He might be cruel, but he valued the lives of his subordinates. Hence, he brought up the topic of prisoners. He wished, even in an exchange, that at least one life could be spared. "It seems you are mistaken," a cold voice echoed. "I don't grant mercy on the battlefield." Slash. Whack. Blood splashed. Baron Zekman, filled with despair, crumpled to the ground as blood gushed from his neck. His body spasmed, and he desperately attempted to staunch the bleeding. However, his actions seemed futile. Moving forward, as they looked ahead, the terrified prisoners' faces came into view. And Roman Dmitri spoke coldly. "We shall not take prisoners. Kill them all." At that time, Duke Bamford had reached the castle. He had expected to find troops guarding the food, but there wasn't a single person in sight. There was only a bloodless entrance. Then he proceeded into the castle. Just in case, Duke Bamford gave the order to check for traps. It is possible that the enemies have already burned all the food and fled. Check for the presence of food and magicians, and ensure that there aren't any traps installed. Once I am certain that everything is secure, I will bring the troops into the castle. I understand. If everything was indeed perfect, it wasn't luck, and it was more likely a trap. The soldiers moved with perfect precision, their faces shining with hope after such a long time. "We have secured the food. They are easy to eat, and if you combine them with what we already have, we can last for a month. I couldn't find any magic traps here. There's no trace of magic energy anywhere in the castle. I've even installed a magic defense system that reacts to explosions in case of anything unexpected. Even if the enemies are up to something, it will give us enough time to respond." It was perfect, but it still felt ominous. Duke Bamford took a step forward and inspected the food himself. The war materials were undamaged, but there was a strange sensation, as if they were being thoughtful, urging them to remain in this spot. Chapter 271. Second Coming of Heavenly Demon. Part 3. The Kronos Empire had finally settled into the old castle. Since the 300,000 soldiers couldn't fit inside the castle, only the main forces entered while the rest were stationed outside. And the leaders were immediately summoned. The problem of concern had been resolved by securing food. However, the ideal situation sparked new doubts. Duke Bamford spoke up. "Tell me what you think of the current situation." He requested an opinion. When you can't come to conclusions on your own, it's necessary to borrow the power of others. And his adaptable thinking came from accepting the opinions of others. The people who served the Duke spoke their minds as if it were a familiar situation. Wasn't it a mistake to attempt clearing the night tactics? The alliance of Cairo and Dmitri tried to ensnare our army by abandoning the Western Front, yet, due to the commander's foresight, we managed to capture the Western Front unscathed. It is probable that the enemy did not anticipate dealing with all of this, considering their hasty retreat from us. My opinion remains unchanged. The food has been inspected, and no traces of poison were found. It is evident that they were negligent here, assuming we would be oblivious to this. The opinions remained the same. In fact, any other scenario seemed nonsensical. In this conflict, the vast difference in power was undeniable. The might of Kronos and his formidable 300,000 army left no room for doubt about their victory in this war against the kingdom. As a result, the opposing sides' options were severely limited. In a situation where they must avoid engaging in a full-scale war, time is not on their side. Even if Quartus were captured, the army of the Kronos Empire would arrive in the west, and from then on, they wouldn't have any chances of victory. It was a perplexing situation. The only way for Roman Dmitri to triumph was to utilize his expertise in navigating through assassinations and seize every opportunity to weaken the enemy. However, with their food supply secured, even that possibility had been eliminated. Based on rational analysis, it appeared to be a victory for Kronos. The leaders who faithfully followed Duke Bamford to countless battlefields didn't deny that Kronos held the advantage this time as well. Was that the reason? Did Duke Bamford have these thoughts? The leaders claimed that occupying the old castle was a divine blessing, but they failed to comprehend Dmitri's desire for this audacious war. This was the intel that they had gathered about Roman Dmitri. He was certainly a challenging factor to reckon within this conflict. And Duke Bamford stated, "What if? What if Dimitri's true intention is to confine us within this castle and compel us into a direct confrontation? That doesn't seem logical. It is practically impossible. Are you suggesting he's that insane? Declaring an all-out war against us?" The backlash was immediate. Using the old castle as bait to lure Kronos and tie them down was simply too much. It defied common sense. However, once the question was posed, it was unlikely to be forgotten. Roman Dimitri. What the hell are you trying to achieve? Why? Did they declare war based solely on Dimitri's strength alone? Unless the starting point of the question had been answered, this problem couldn't be fully accepted, even after the meeting was concluded. And Duke Bamford's firm expression remained unconvinced. At that moment, Roman Dimitri's name was also being discussed in other places. Edwin Hector, the King of Redford, and the King of Franks. The King of Franks appeared anxious at the gathering of the pro-Dimitri forces. The Kronos Empire has already taken down the Western Front. Roman Dimitri has shown great success in capturing Rascal and Cordes, but shouldn't we quickly send reinforcements to avoid getting pushed? With Umberto and Odelia almost certain to side with the Kronos Empire, this ambiguous attitude could doom us. Roman Dimitri's move was confusing. In the battle against the Kronos Empire, he initiated the attack and sequentially defeated Rascal and Cordes, proving that it wasn't merely an empty threat. Such a feat had never been witnessed before on the Salamander continent. Amidst the escalating flames of war, the King of Franks yearned to find a way to bolster their forces. When Dimitri succumbed to despair, all hope was lost. The Franks' kingdom would pay a hefty toll for aligning with Dimitri. Edwin Hector disapproved, shaking his head. No, not now. Roman Dimitri said he would prove that he could fight Kronos with the strength of Dimitri alone. Perhaps he made that decision to show that this war is not impossible to win. So, why not observe it? If Roman Dimitri truly proves his words, then there is no reason to fear the Kronos Empire anymore. I am worried. Duke Bamford of Kronos isn't an easy person. It was the King of Redford. To the reaction that everyone couldn't put down their worries, Edwin spoke the truth. Actually, when I heard the report that Roman Dimitri had acquired the Warp Gate, it frightened me. Not because it was a unique plan, but because on the day of his proclamation of the Dimitri Duchy, I visited Dimitri and heard his tale. He said to Chris. As they were now all on the same page, Chris proposed something that would pique Edwin's interest. Your lord has given Prince Edwin Hector some words of acknowledgement. Everyone is considering the daring decision to attack the Warp Gate, but putting it into action is a challenging problem. Since then, the lord has been studying the Warp Gates. I didn't ask why, but he was probably impressed with Edwin Hector's strategy. They were simple words, but the words that normal people would normally accept were shocking to Edwin. And Edwin said, "The battle on the southern front was a total disaster for Hector. None of my plans worked in my confrontation with Roman Dimitri, and I have never felt so devastated in my life. However, it's also frightening to see Roman Dimitri still striving to improve himself despite his overwhelming victory. Even now, the presence that I never dared to approach continues to torment me." Kronos and Dimitri. At the crossroads of making a decision, Edwin Hector chose Dimitri. Aside from the simple reason that he had a troubled history with Kronos, he hoped that his experience wouldn't provoke Roman's hostility. I'd rather avoid confrontations with Dimitri than Kronos. One such experience is enough in a lifetime. So have faith and be patient. Just like my defeat on the southern front, which I initially considered a total victory, he must have a plan to reverse the situation. He believed in what he experienced. The devil of the southern front, Roman Dimitri, on that day. Roman Dimitri had a simple plan. Duke Bamford led his forces to the western front, leaving the remaining forces in eastern Kronos unable to stop Dimitri's attack. In the blink of an eye, Roman Dimitri seized control of eastern Kronos. Now, as the decisive battle with the Kronos Empire in Cairo loomed ahead, Roman Dimitri ordered his troops to rest adequately. Except for one person. Under the moonlight, Kevin fought with his sword, unable to sleep. Rumble. Rumbly. In his mind's eye, his aura exploded. Through the intense storm of aura, he could make out Sven approaching him. Kang. Pain flickered across his face. Kevin's aura shattered as he clashed head-on, allowing Sven's sword to slice through his body. It was an unimaginably agonizing situation. With that single strike, Kevin's body lost all control, leaving him helpless against a monster like Sven in his now crippled form. His fate was sealed. He couldn't move. He had studied Sven's moves countless times, but it ultimately led to his demise. If I meet someone as powerful as Sven on the battlefield, what can I do to serve my lord? However, that possibility didn't exist. It was a remarkable achievement for him, a boy from the slums, to have reached his current level. It would be too ambitious to surpass the 6-star aura test. He had no knowledge of it. It was only natural that he was defeated by Sven, and he deserved admiration simply for defeating such a capable man. But he was losing consciousness. When he thought about Henderson, who was always by his side, he found it difficult to control his emotions. I don't want to relive what occurred back then. If I stumble hopelessly, as usual, the Lord would have to resolve the issues I couldn't handle. Some claim that those who followed the Lord are accountable for Dmitri, but the truth is that it all stemmed from their belief that the Lord would solve everything. He brandished his sword. He tried to imagine where Sven was and charged at him recklessly. But the outcome was catastrophic, and he tumbled repeatedly. During a time when everyone else was asleep, Kevin was completely beaten up. His memory of that day surged, fueling his anger. Uncontrollable emotions shattered his heart. Ugh! His eyes burned red. Just as he was about to succumb to the consuming darkness within him, a voice pierced through the chaos. Kevin. It was unmistakably Roman Dmitri's voice. At the mention of the person he yearned for, his eyes, filled with murderous intent, regained their former glow. No further explanation was necessary. He looked at Kevin, who was losing consciousness. Ever since joining Cordes, he had heard that Kevin couldn't sleep for a second. His face was pale. Roman Dmitri calmly said in a situation where his mind was clouded. I have something to tell you now. It was a short story. A story that was about him and one that Kevin couldn't readily accept. If I analyze what people have said about Aura, I realize that the way of this world has developed in the wrong direction. At one point, I believed that unleashing extreme destructive power through reckless eruptions could be innovative, but I was convinced otherwise when I encountered Barbassa and the other formidable individuals on the continent. The day Chris introduced him to Aura, Roman Dmitri dismissed it as a worthless approach. And as time passed, he acknowledged that this was a new experience, yet he sensed a distinction in his battle with Barbassa. The clash earlier had been a test of power. How powerful were the legendary 12 swords of the continent in this world? How many swords could he summon and conquer? But Barbassa's swordsmanship had no foundation. Just as there was a saying that swordsmanship had an eventual end, they said that even though Barbassa had the destructive power of a 6-star aura, that was his limit. Doubt started to rise. If the destructive power caused by an eruption was the root, then the distinctions were actually meaningless. The Murim sword technique of the Central Plains didn't focus on destructive power. Softness overwhelmed strength, and each individual's sword technique flourished to shape a world known as the Central Plains Murim. However, he couldn't comprehend the utilization of the aura in this world. The art of magic was undoubtedly remarkable, but the background of the aura swordsman differed. Suddenly, he felt self-assured that his sword technique reigned supreme across the continent. Ever since Barbassa had been recognized as one of the 12 esteemed swordsmen of the continent, there was no one in the world who could challenge him in a duel. And thus, in a life-or-death battle, the power of aura doesn't ensure victory. You may have encountered an insurmountable obstacle when facing a 6-star aura swordsman, but in truth, the presence of that wall signifies your creation. If you can truly grasp the essence of aura and possess the strength to match it, even as a 3-star aura swordsman, it is not impossible for you to defeat a 6-star aura swordsman. A ripple appeared in Kevin's eyes. Roman Dimitri's words were like stepping into a new world. Just as he had stated, Kevin was willing to sacrifice his life to obtain the power needed to vanquish Sven. And upon witnessing Kevin's determination, Roman Dimitri declared, "Henceforth, I shall bestow upon you the wisdom of the heavenly demon sword technique." Chapter 272. Second Coming of Heavenly Demon. Part 4. On that day, Kevin wasn't the only one unable to sleep. In the upcoming war, those who have fought alongside Roman Dimitri are essential for the Kingdom Alliance's victory. Leave this task to me. If you defeat Hannibal, I will soon join you. Chris kept Count Nicholas's words in mind. Understanding that Count Nicholas's sacrifice would be in vain if he wavered, Chris made the decision to grit his teeth and run. At the time, he believed that it was just the way it was. Hannibal's aura was intimidating, and he knew he was a formidable monster, impossible to defeat with a couple of attacks. It was a total defeat. Leaving the Western Front in ruins, he couldn't bear to look back, using strategy as his excuse. And just a few days ago, he heard about Count Nicholas from the people. Those who witnessed Count Nicholas's final moments confirmed that he was slain by Hannibal, unable to defend himself for long. He was a truly skilled swordsman. If Count Nicholas hadn't intercepted the Kronos Empire, we would have faced complete annihilation without a trace. It was a calamity. The messenger attempted to paint Count Nicholas's actions in a favorable light, but Chris, gazing at the heavens, couldn't help but feel utterly helpless. Following in the footsteps of Roman Dimitri, he led a perilous existence, constantly flirting with death. In the meantime, he had made rapid progress. Paradoxically, the stronger he got, the more he realized he was just a frog in the well. The world was so wide. In order to stay by Roman Dimitri's side, he couldn't justify defeat every time just because the world was wide. Barbassa and Hannibal. There were more strong people like them. If nothing could be done against such monsters, the same thing that happened with Count Nicholas was bound to happen again. Even in such circumstances, was it morally justifiable to survive at the expense of another? No, even if he managed to survive in such a manner, could he truly consider himself an indispensable presence for Roman Dimitri? Then he clenched his teeth in frustration. The lofty objective Chris aspired to achieve was to collapse with a feeling of disgrace. He yearned to surpass Roman Dimitri. However, if he were to succumb to shame like this, it appeared that he would never be able to assert that he could surpass Roman Dimitri once more. Chuck. He wielded the sword. And from that moment on, everything changed. Chris embarked on his swordsmanship journey alone. How could he wield the sword with more speed and strength? If only he possessed enough skill to aid Count Nicholas, he would have triumphed over Hannibal in a surprise attack. His mind was in disarray due to Roman Dimitri's ambush and the covert abilities of Knights Commander Jonathan. Unleashing his sword, he moved forward with determination. And as always, from afar, Chris gazed at Roman Dimitri. A day passed, then two, and time continued to elapse with his burning desire to be taught. However, he couldn't, as Roman had requested that he grow on his own. The memories of that time flooded his mind, one by one. How did Roman Dimitri wield the sword, and for what purpose? Through the manner in which Roman Dimitri embraced the mana, he carried the weight of countless years of accumulated knowledge within his mind. His thoughts gnawed at him, driving him to desperately seek the truth that had remained hidden from his view. The Lord's method doesn't prioritize the aura's explosive strength. By simply accepting and preserving the mana in its original state, the aura took on a completely unique form. It greatly differed from what is typically taught in this world. While some may dismiss this method as counterfeit, he understood, standing by his Lord's side, that this was the true and correct answer. The answer. Only one person determined the first correct answer. He built walls along the path of the continent, merged it with Roman Dimitri's path, and forged a unique path of his own. Having already embraced the ways of the continent, he sought a means to fully unleash his dual strengths. The sun rose and set. And amidst the eternal flow of time, Chris fell into a deep trance. Then suddenly, swish, hududud. His bones began to reform, causing a profound transformation within his body. In the early morning, Pookie and Vulcan walked into the training room, their faces exhausted. "What brings, Mr. Chris, your face is glowing." Both were shocked. As Chris called out to them, they were taken aback by his changed appearance, which was different from their memories. The person who was usually called the most handsome in Dimitri was Chris. But with his jade-like skin and flowing blonde hair, Chris's appearance had been upgraded a few steps. However, Chris didn't even pay attention to the compliment on his appearance. "From now on, I will attempt to attack you. If you can block my attack, I'll give you your salary for the whole year." "Are you being serious?" "I won't change my words." His eyes shifted. Having followed Roman Dimitri and received numerous rewards, Pookie and Vulcan, who were born as war mercenaries, didn't hesitate when it came to money. So they followed Roman Dimitri without further hesitation. It was because he wasn't just demanding loyalty, but rather rewarding it based on the hard work they did. Chris's words were a mistake. They knew his sword technique was as swift as lightning, but neither of them could be described as normal swordsmen. Both of them wielded swords in their hands, and in the tense air, Chris said, exactly 10 seconds later, "I will cut Vulcan's shirt and Pookie's hair." What now? They found it absurd. Training involved blocking attacks, but Chris was explaining how he would attack instead. They felt he was looking down on them. Even though they had fought countless times, they couldn't defeat Chris every single time, but blocking was a completely different matter. There was no possibility of defeat. And their slightly flushed faces indicated that their pride was wounded. A second passed, then 5 seconds. They swallowed nervously. They kept track of the time, and when 9 seconds passed, the two of them raised their mana. In that instant, swish, pat. The wind blew gently. The pieces of Vulcan's clothing and Pookie's hair flew before they could even notice Chris. They didn't even feel any pain. Actually, the attack lacked killing intent, so their skin wasn't burned, but the two showed a fascinated expression as they looked at Chris. The attack was swift. Even after being attacked, they couldn't understand how it had happened. Just how? Chris tightly clenched his sword. The last few days had been eventful. He had now stepped into a new realm. In the midst of the excruciating pain, as his body shattered and his muscles snapped, Chris discovered a newfound strength that he had never been able to attain before. This was Roman Dimitri's martial art, and it wasn't even Jonathan's secret technique. It was his own. And Chris had now joined the ranks of these extraordinary individuals. The day was tranquil. The Kronos Empire, which had been idly standing guard, was taken aback by the reports from the scouts. At this very moment, Roman Dimitri is approaching with his troops. As the enemies advanced, a meeting was convened. The report seemed entirely unbelievable to them. It is evident that Roman Dimitri has gone mad, declaring an all-out war against 300,000 troops. There is no need to make hasty decisions. The Southern Front alone proved that Roman Dimitri had a knack for tactics in battle. The enemy's advances are likely due to unforeseen strategic reasons, and we don't really want a full-blown war. So let's maintain our current position. If we rush out, we will never know the outcome. Was it because it was an unusual situation? No, there was a conflict of opinion instead. The leaders' voices were intermingled and muddled, and Duke Bamford's expression turned angry. "Kwang! Everyone, lower your voices." Anger surged. In the presence of the furious Duke Bamford, the leaders finally fell silent. It doesn't matter what Roman Dimitri's intentions were. The problem is that they tried to provoke an all-out war against the Kronos Empire. Isn't it really the same thing? To believe that a single kingdom could emerge victorious against a place like the Kronos Empire. From now on, it becomes a matter of pride. If we don't crush the spirit of Roman Dimitri, who holds his head high, we will undoubtedly be mocked by the continent even in victory. The commander was cowardly but devoted to the defense of the old castle despite having an army of 300,000. This was an unacceptable situation. If the enemy had intended to provoke anger, they had certainly succeeded. A trap? There was no need to worry. Whatever the enemies had prepared, they would crush it with their overwhelming force. Command the soldiers of the Kronos Empire. We shall personally punish Roman Dmitri. We will follow your orders. The fuse ignited. There weren't any complicated plans, but the power of the sword would determine victory or defeat on the battlefield. Above the plains, the troops of both armies surged forward. The difference in numbers was overwhelming. While the Kronos Empire resembled a crashing wave, Roman Dmitri's army seemed to fade into the distance. Their troops couldn't be considered small. The forces that had withdrawn from the Western Front also joined, but the Kronos Empire's forces were so numerous that they overpowered them. They marched at consistent intervals and were then joined by the others. In a tense moment, Roman Dmitri stepped out towards the enemy. Step. Step. He closed the distance. Then he came to a halt and raised his voice to the enemies. I am Roman Dmitri, hailing from the esteemed Dmitri Duchy. I humbly request a grand battle of skilled warriors from the esteemed authority of the mighty Kronos Empire. A mighty clash of warriors was waiting, and whispers spread throughout the crowd. Speculations arose as they pondered Roman's desire for a glorious battle, igniting a surge of emotions. Shock, surprise, and outrage asserted their presence among the observers. The majority of them were consumed by anger. In this place, where Roman Dmitri mentioned the great warrior battle, Hannibal stood out. He wasn't just any swordsman, but the second ranker in Kronos. It couldn't be that Roman Dmitri didn't know about it. However, Hannibal's expression twisted at the thought of it. I will deal with him in return. No, that's not allowed. Duke Bamford was resolute, knowing the opponent's intentions. Roman Dmitri aimed to combine practical advantages and create a captivating ambience by wielding the formidable sword owned by the Kronos Empire. Hannibal's expertise was duly acknowledged by the Kronos Empire. Even Roman Dmitri couldn't prevail against an opponent of such caliber, but it was still important to be ready for any variables. Barbassa and Hannibal. In a clash between the two, who would emerge victorious? Hannibal would undoubtedly come out on top, but it might not be inconceivable for Roman Dmitri to overcome him given enough time. And the Kronos Empire acknowledged it. Roman Dmitri wasn't just a frog in the well. He was strong enough to be discussed as the best on the continent. Then there was no reason to accept it. The power of the Kronos Empire was something that could be proven through results rather than occasional battles. Roman Dmitri. Do you really want to fight by forcing us? He couldn't believe it. There were 300,000 troops. Hannibal and Schiffer. It was absurd to go against the strength of the Kronos in this attempt. If that was all, there wasn't any point. After thoroughly analyzing the existence of Roman Dmitri, the Duke of Bamford didn't allow a fight between Roman Dmitri and Hannibal. It was at that moment that Roman Dmitri said, "If you're afraid of facing me in battle, I can alter the plan. I'll appoint 2 warriors to take my place, and you can do the same. However, if you persist in rejecting this proposal, I'll simply pretend it was never made." Those words were deliberately aimed at provoking Duke Bamford and unsettle him.